The first scream of Princess Seraya tore across the sky the same moment a star shattered above the hidden kingdom of Caldria. Midwives whispered that a cosmic wanderer had split open, so its silver dust could pour into the cradle of a child who would change everything. Outside the palace, rain struck marble halls like thrown pebbles, and thunder rolled down the mountains as if the heavens were beating war drums. Inside the birthing chamber, tapestries billowed in an unnatural wind that flowed inward instead of outward, curling candle flames toward the baby as though fire itself wanted to greet her. Queen Maelin, still slick with sweat, tried to touch her daughter's cheek. "She is so small," she murmured, but her voice fled beneath another rumble overhead. The infant's eyes snapped open, ice bright, unblinking, and the midwives gasped. Newborns normally blinked a torchlight, yet Seraya stared back without flinching, as though she had already memorized every secret written on the walls. "Blessed by the storm, cursed by the storm," croaked the seer who lived behind the chapel apse. He had been summoned too late for his warning to prevent the birth, so he stood hunched in the doorway, shaking tiny bones in his fist. When the rattling stopped, one black sparrow feather lay on the floor. His terrible grin said what no one dared voice: "Proud hearts invite proud fates." Years turned, and with them, Seraya grew like a sword tempered in alternating ice and fire. Tutors found her brilliant yet impossible. She spoke 3 languages before her 10th year, learned to read the wind by matching cloud shadows with ground echoes, and once solved a chess puzzle the royal scholar had spent decades refining. But she also refused any gesture of affection that smelled of pity. One nursemaid tried to cradle her after a nightmare. Seraya bit the woman's shoulder hard enough to draw blood, then apologized in flawless verse before requesting a new bedtime story. Courtiers adored tales of her beauty. They spoke of hair that captured lightning sheen and a gaze that left Bart stammering. Yet those same courtiers left the throne room trembling whenever the princess examined them for weakness. Seraya walked as if the marble itself should step out of her way. She did not just distrust praise. She devoured it, stripping it to bare intention, then tossing away whatever rang hollow. A minstrel once compared her eyes to still pools. She replied that any pool left still for long enough turned stagnant. The poor man left court and never sang again. On her 16th name day, Caldria held a grand tourney beneath banners of silver and dusk blue. Knights arrived in columns, armor polished, anxious to earn the future queen's notice. Some wore roses that had not wilted. Others quoted epic love poems before a crowd of swooning ladies. Seraya watched from a balcony, chin resting on her knuckles, as each man attempted feats of daring. One foreign champion tested a new lance built of mandrake wood and claimed it would never break. It snapped on the first pass, and Seraya's laughter, sharp, crystalline, echoed so loudly that ravens startled from the cedars. The crowd learned to fear that laugh. By 19, Seraya's rejection stories ranked among Caldria's favorite gossip, a lord who fainted after she corrected his genealogy, a philosopher who wept when she proved his existential theorem had a flaw so simple a child could see it, a commander who retired to a monastery because he could not bear the weight of her indifference. The palace staff whispered that she was untouchable. Merchants said she was invincible. Some radicals muttered darker things, that she was cursed by the gods who once fell in starfire, that she did not carry blood at all but rather the chilled sap of a cosmic tree. Seraya heard every rumor and felt nothing. Her heart, she believed, was a fortress too high for scaling, forged for rulership, not romance. Often she sat alone atop the North Tower, legs dangling over empty air, watching distant storm cells flicker between the high peaks. She found beauty in violent skies, comfort in thunder's promise that even heaven could split itself open and still retain majesty. When lightning forked, she raised a hand toward that white wound, as if to claim kinship with anything that refused to crawl. One midsummer festival, a wandering puppeteer performed a play in which a princess spurned every suitor until a humble farmer taught her compassion. Children clapped. Adults seemed relieved. Seraya remained still, shadowed by torchlight, expressionless until the play ended. Then she rose, descended the dais, and whispered to the puppeteer, "Compassion is not taught by humiliation. It is born of recognition." She handed him a gold coin larger than his palm and walked away. Behind her, the puppeteer burst into grateful tears, yet he also sensed his script had been politely demolished. Beyond palace walls, murmurs grew darker. Caldria's outer provinces suffered crop blights caused by unpredictable rains. Fishermen blamed the rolling storms that did not follow old calendars. Noble houses quietly wondered whether the princess's icy command over hearts had somehow offended ancient wheelworks that balanced pride against mercy. At court, a prophecy started to ossify from rumor into doctrine. Seraya must fall in love willingly, or the land itself would lose faith in its rulers. But who could be worthy of that impossible task? The question lingered like a splinter, working deeper each time the sky flashed. In the silence between thunderclaps, Caldria waited, and Seraya stood undefeated, unaware that the price of such perfection would soon demand payment in a currency even she could not mint. Winter crept down from the Rheinfang Mountains, running its claws along every river until water flowed slower than rumor. Fields that should have surrendered only their husks cracked apart and died early. By the time the first snows arrived, King Alaric could feel hunger coiling beneath the benches of his council chamber. Grain stores that once fed 10,000 mouths through lean months now bulged with weevils. The master of coin offered a trembling quill when asked for new projections, and his voice cracked on the word famine. Alaric loved his daughter. He admired her towering mind and even feared her sharpened pride, yet he could not ignore the wayward glances traced her path whenever she passed. Advisors spoke of balance. Priests spoke of omens. The common folk did not speak at all. They watched clouds and counted how many lightning strikes converged above the palace spires. When a traveling soothsayer collapsed in the city square after shrieking that Caldria's heart had grown armored, the royal guard carried the poor woman to a hospice. She died that night, but her final words already infected tavern talk. The council begged Alaric for decisive action. "We are losing faith faster than coin," warned Lord Castell, a man whose moustache quivered whenever Seraya entered the chamber. "Sedition grows wherever fear breeds. Offer the people a story with a hopeful ending." In private, the high priestess urged myths older than any parchment. She reminded the king of a vow carved into the foundation stone beneath his throne. Harmony between crown and cosmos must be renewed by blood or by bond. So Alaric composed a decree. Its ink was pressed by 10 seals and carried on white banners to every corner of Caldria. The message rang clear: "Whosoever shall pierce the armor around the heart of Princess Seraya with nothing but truth and devotion shall share in the inheritance of Caldria. Fail, and you shall leave these borders stripped of title forever." Some called the edict cruel. Others called it inspired. Every wandering bard called it irresistible. Within weeks, caravans clogged the Grand Highway, each bearing would-be saviors. A scholar from Erelor arrived astride an ox painted with swirling runes that glowed at dusk. He claimed knowledge of forgotten constellations that aligned love with justice. A desert warlord named Kaidus rode beside 30 warriors whose shields bore mirrors, reflecting sunrise into the eyes of the curious. He swore that no fortress, heart or castle, could withstand his mirrored legion. A merchant prince unfurled silks dyed with colors that seemed to shift between shades unknown to mortal vision, promising emotions never before felt. Seraya watched the procession from a terrace high above. Trumpets blared. Horses snorted clouds of steam. Petals thrown by hopeful citizens clogged gutters, then froze into crimson sludge overnight. The princess pressed her palms against the balustrade until the stone squeaked. "They look hungry," she observed to her lady-in-waiting, Maelin. "Hungry for glory or for food, Highness?" Maelin asked, shivering beneath her foxfur cloak. Seraya's answer drifted like frost, barely audible over the trumpets. "Either way, they will taste disappointment." The trials began under clear skies, as though nature itself paused to witness. On the first dawn, candidates lined the marble walk, each required to speak a single vow before stepping onto palace grounds. Some vowed eternal service. Others vowed to build libraries, hospitals, or temples once they became consort. One gaunt poet vowed to die happily if granted the sight of Seraya's smile. He never saw it. She swept past, veil trailing like pale smoke, and the poet sank to his knees as if he had glimpsed a saint too radiant for flesh. Inside the Hall of Reflections, an atrium walled entirely in polished obsidian, Seraya posed 3 questions to each suitor. The questions shifted constantly, tailored to unravel any illusion that entered on confident feet. The scholar of Erelor faltered when she asked him to recite the lullaby his mother used to hush nightmares. He could recall every verse of Style lore but not the tune that once softened his childhood, and Seraya dismissed him with one raised brow. Kaidus the warlord, eager to parade might, boasted of conquests and the number of widows who cursed his banners. Seraya asked for the name of the first friend he ever lost in battle. His silence boomed louder than any trumpet. She thanked him for his honesty and banned him from Caldria forever. The merchant prince lasted longest. He spoke not of wealth but of textures and scents. He described silk that could calm sorrow when stroked across a cheek, and pepper that might ignite courage when breathed before dawn. Seraya listened, intrigued, until he produced a bolt of cloth that shimmered like water hiccuping sunlight. "This is called everhue," he said. "It is yours." Seraya touched the fabric and felt her pulse quicken, for it seemed to warm, then cool, then warm again in cycles like living skin. But she released it and asked, "Would you surrender every wonder you own if the price of my love was living without marvel?" The prince hesitated one heartbeat too long. That pause was his exile. Day followed day. Snow piled around marble pillars, forcing torches to burn all night so wardens could guide yet another hopeful to the hole. Failure piled higher. Gossip shifted from admiration to disbelief. Some onlookers began carving notches on the palace gate to count the rejected. When the number passed 100, a jester joked that the kingdom would run out of names before Seraya ran out of reasons to decline. Amid growing tension, Seraya practiced sword drills alone in the frost garden. She sliced falling snowflakes with such precision that gardeners feared the roses might lose petals to her blade come spring. Late one evening, King Alaric joined her under the moon. His breath fogged white as he spoke. "Daughter, do you enjoy this?" He gestured at the empty arcades, the footprints that led nowhere because no conversation could hold her. Seraya lowered his sword. "Enjoyment is irrelevant." "Then consider duty," Alaric said, voice thick. "We bleed coin and hope. The people need proof their future queen believes in more than her own legend." Seraya's jaw flexed. "I will not choose a fool for spectacle." "Neither will I." Alaric placed a gloved hand on her shoulder. "But we are perched on a cliff of mistrust. Show them you can step toward companionship, or they will step away from the throne." He left her beneath the colorless stars, carrying a weight heavier than any crown. In the days that followed, Seraya's dreams became fractured mirrors. In each she stood atop the North Tower as lightning curved toward her like silver rivers, but just before the bolt struck, a shadow blocked the light and swallowed everything. Each morning she woke with her pulse drumming against her ribs as though trying to escape. Then, on the 17th dawn of the trials, rain came without warning. It fell in narrow silver spears, so dense it seemed the air itself was unweaving. The palace courtyard emptied, and torches hissed struggled flame. Thunder muttered like a prophet too hoarse for diction. As palace guards hurried to roll up carpets now soaked with sleet, the gates yawned open, framing a solitary figure. He was barefoot. Mud coated his calves. His cloak looked like a midnight sky that had forgotten its stars. He carried no banner, no satchel, no weapon. When the captain of the guard demanded his name, the man answered, "I left it behind." Water sheeted off his shoulders, yet he stood as though wind could not tilt him. Seraya watched from a colonnade, hidden behind a pillar. Something in her chest moved, a sensation she mistook for a shiver until she realized it was a question. She leaned forward despite herself. The stranger entered, leaving footprints that filled instantly with rain. Each step seemed measured not against distance but against silence, as though he marched to a rhythm only he could hear. He stopped before the Hall of Reflections, ignoring the guard who tried to shove him back into protocol. Instead he looked up, eyes sweeping shadowed balconies, until they collided with Seraya's gaze. In that collision the thunder paused. The world felt thinner, stretched between two possibilities. The stranger raised one hand, palm outward, not in greeting but in challenge. His lips formed two words Seraya read without sound. "Test me." In that instant, princess and kingdom and cosmic storm bent toward a single pivot. The trials were no longer a game nor a decree for hope. They became the doorway through which fate itself would walk, barefoot and unnamed, carrying the cost of pride in its invisible hands. Dawn cracked pale and silent over Caldria as a herald's horn carried straight up the palace shaft and rattled the stained-glass windows of the south wing. Inside her receiving chamber Seraya waited behind an ivory screen carved with spiraling stars. She was still armored in morning practice leathers, damp hair coiled at her nape, sword oil lingering on her gloves like cedar and smoke. Outside, the latest aspirant was pacing, his footfalls heavy, his breathing shallow. He would be the first of 17 summoned that day. Maelin entered with a tray holding 2 bowls of figs and almonds. "You have not eaten," she said, voice soft. If you plan to flay another scholar alive with rhetoric, you may want something in your stomach. Seraya took a single almond. Food dulls the edge, she answered, though her eyes followed Maelin with something like affection. After yesterday's parade of boastful dreamers, I would keep every nerve singing. The ivory doors swung wide. A steward announced Lord Phineas of Highwater, heir to shipping lanes that threaded the far delta. He wore layered silk the color of spilled sunrise and carried a rosewood lyre inlaid with mother-of-pearl. At the first sight of Seraya he bowed low enough that his jeweled brow nearly kissed polished marble. "My lady, I bear a song composed for you alone," he said, straightening with theatrical gravity. "A melody no tide can erase." Seraya motioned to the cushioned dais opposite her. "Very well. Sing, and do not choke on your promise." He plucked the first note. It rang clear, glittering like sunlight on oars. The tune climbed slowly, weaving minor harmonies around a steady spine of hope. Lyrics followed, drenched in metaphors of distant lighthouses, moons pulled to kiss the sea, ships willingly wrecked on the rocks of devotion. His voice was trained, rich, almost painfully earnest. Maelin closed her eyes and swayed. Even the guards at the door leaned closer. Seraya listened without blinking. She could see each clever rhyme before it arrived, could map every chord change by the way his fingers shifted. Beauty, yes, she granted him that. Yet the song felt rehearsed, sanded to perfection long before it touched her ears. Near the end he lifted the lyre high as if offering the music itself for judgment, final chord shimmering into silence. When echoes died, Seraya leaned forward. "Tell me," she said, "when was the last time you sang without rehearsal? Without audience? A tune born in the throat of midnight when you were Satan no one could hear." Phineas faltered. "Highness, preparation is the art. My craft demands." "Answer the question." Color drained from his cheeks. "I do not remember." Seraya rose now, the screen of ivory stars casting jagged shadows across her face. "If your devotion relies on practiced spectacle, it will rot at the first breath of failure." She gestured, a flick of two fingers. God stepped forward, gentle but firm. "Your ships may weather storms, Lord of Highwater, but your heart has never sailed without a map. That is not enough." Phineas bowed again, lower, and this time his silks whispered not glory but defeat. He allowed himself to be guided from the chamber. The doors shut with a hush like a tomb ceiling. Maelin exhaled. "You have lost count, princess. That is the 119th. "Numbers hold no mercy," Seraya replied, yet the faintest line creased her brow. She walked to the room's tall slit windows. Beyond them Caldria spread in terraces of slate roofs and winding smoke. A winter sun bled pale fire across frost-stiff orchards. Somewhere out there hungry citizens measured the future in cups of grain. Her father's warning brushed her memory like cold breath. Step toward companionship or the people will step away from the throne. Below, the marble walk echoed anew. More hopefuls waited. Scholars with scrolls, swordsmen with scars, magi with eyes full of impossible light. Each certain he possessed a singular key to a guarded heart. Seraya tasted weariness, a flavor like iron shavings at the back of her tongue. She wanted challenge, not flattery. Honesty, not ornament. Instead she was offered pageantry. A perfumer prince who tried to summon childhood nostalgia by diffusing the scent of kettle bread. A solar mystic who claimed to see lattices of fate arching over her skull. Twin acrobats proposing polyamorous unity because no single soul could contain the immensity of his spirit. By dusk, torchlight jittered on discarded tokens, jewels, parchments, lightning glass, all refused. That night, storms massed over the western ridges. Thunder rolled in long mournful waves. Seraya climbed the north tower alone and spread her arms into the bitter wind until sleet stung her skin raw. Lights of the capital flickered below. She whispered to the deck, "If the gods demand a breaking, let them shatter me rather than my kingdom." Her words vanished into the howl. Lightning answered, but there was no translation in its searing flash, only the certainty that something immense was listening. On the 17th day the rain did not begin as drizzle. It dropped like a blade, sudden and heavy, tanning courtyards to mirrored slate. Candles guttered in their sconces. Trumpets that usually announced each candidate grew waterlogged and mute. When the palace gates creaked open, the guards expected another caravan, yet only a lone figure stood upon the threshold. He wore a cloak of rough midnight wool that drank the rain until it hung heavy against his shoulders. Bare feet, caked in mud up to the cuff, planted steady on stone. No crest, no retinue, not even a satchel. One of the gate wardens called out in standard protocol, "Declare name and province." The man gazed through the downpour. His eyes were neither light nor dark but carried a steady quiet, like windless dusk on a lake. "I left my name behind when it was no longer useful," he said. "Protocol demanded names for the registry, titles for heraldry, lineage for heraldic scrolls." The officer stepped closer, annoyed. "Every entrant must be recorded. Your liege lord. At least offer that." "I save no liege," the man replied. "I come to be tested, nothing more." Rain hammered steel helmets like drumming claws. The other guard shifted. They had escorted fools, zealots, and visionaries, but they had never met silence so unwavering. Finally the captain considered the letter of the decree. Alaric's command invited any heart brave enough to attempt Seraya's. The word "any" left no space for rank. "Let him pass," the captain ordered. "But keep him under watch." The stranger walked. His steps left brief impressions in flooded cobblestones that filled almost instantly. Servants whispered behind curtains at the sight of bare feet. Boys who had skipped duties to glimpse new suitors watched wide-eyed as water streamed from the visitor's cloak, but never seemed to make him shiver. He crossed the courtyard beneath banners sagging with rain until he reached the covered arcade outside the Hall of Reflections. Seraya waited within. She had heard the commotion, yet none of the gossip could explain the unusual hush that seemed to travel with this candidate. She stood behind a column, half concealed, when he entered the atrium. Obsidian walls mirrored torchlight into infinite constellations. The stranger paused, raindrops sliding from his hair onto the flawless black floor where they shimmered like tiny stars before vanishing. A tribunal of 3 magistrates approached with parchments. One cleared his throat. "State your given name for the record." The man studied the ink-ready quills. Then he met the magistrate's gaze. "Names shape expectation. I would be measured against sounds rather than substance. Measure me instead by what I do." The lead magistrate bristled. "This hall honors tradition. Without identification you cannot." Seraya stepped forward. Her voice cut across the marble hush. "He is permitted." Every eye turned. The princess descended shallow steps, her ceremonial boots ringing quietly. She wore no crown, only a circlet of braided silver wire that caught torchlight. Hair, still damp from practice, framed her face in ink-black arcs. She looked at the stranger as though appraising a new weapon, respect edged with curiosity. "You will answer my questions," she said, seating herself on a low platform. 3. Truthfully. Then I will decide if you advance." The stranger inclined his head, neither deferent nor proud. "Questions reveal more about the inquisitor than the accused," he said. "Ask, and let us both be uncovered." A flicker of surprise crossed Seraya's features. The magistrates retreated to the walls, scribes at the ready. She began. "First question. What is the most valuable thing you have willingly broken?" The stranger answered without pause. "Silence, when injustice depends upon it." The scribe's quill scratched. Seraya tapped a finger on her knee. "Second, whom do you serve?" "My conscience," he said. "Everything else is temporary." Maimus rippled at such blunt irreverence. Seraya's eyes narrowed. Not with anger, something keener. "Third, if you should fail these trials and be stripped of citizenship, where will you go?" He considered at last. "Wherever my feet point when dawn arrives. Exile is a concept for those who believe land owns them. I belong to the motion between steps, not the soil under them." His calm was not arrogance. Rather, it felt ancient, forged beyond reach of ordinary stakes. Seraya stood. "Advance." She gestured toward an inner archway rarely used before the final day. "You will meet me in the Garden of Thorns at moonrise. Until then, remain within the West Guest Barracks. Touch no weapon. Speak to no one about these holes." God stepped forward. The stranger nodded, following quietly, leaving no more pools of water on the polished obsidian. When the doors closed, Maelin emerged from a side corridor, breathless. "Highness, this is madness. The council has guidelines, investigation of lineage, mental soundness, even medical alchemy to prevent poisonous." Seraya silenced her with a glance. Lineage cannot measure what walks in that man's eyes. And what does walk there? Maelin asked. Seraya looked beyond the chamber, beyond the dripping corridors toward a horizon only she could see. A mirror, she whispered. But I do not yet know if it will shatter me or show me true. Moonlight bled silver across the garden of thorns, an arena of interlaced brambles and obsidian plinths reserved for rites of coronation and judgment. No lanterns were permitted, ritual demanded naked night. The air smelled of wet soil and winter roses that bloomed blood-red against the dark lattice of vines. Seraya arrived first. She wore a tunic of midnight wool for freedom of movement, hair bound in a single braid down her spine. At her belt hung 2 wooden practice blades, though garden custom allowed steel she had chosen would to signal intention without surrendering advantage. She paced the ring path, boots brushing fallen petals. The stranger emerged from a shadowed archway. He had abandoned the rain-weighted cloak, wearing instead simple linen, bare arms revealing faint white scars that curved like faded script. He carried no weapon, not even a staff. He stopped at the garden gate, waiting. Seraya spoke into the hush. You know our law. To advance beyond this night you must survive 3 passages through the thorns. Weapons optional. Each pass set by me. He stepped forward. Moonlight splashed across his features, angular yet softened by exhaustion that did not look like weakness. I will face whatever path you draw. Then mark the first passage. She flicked her wrist. 1 wooden sword arced toward him. He caught it with fluid reflex, grip settling as if he had known its weight all his life. Seraya drew her own, saluted by touching hilt to heart, then leveled the blade. Feist trial, endurance of will. We crossed the garden circumference in silence, blades locked, no word spoken. Break silence and you fail. He nodded once. Seraya advanced. Their wooden swords kissed with a muted clack. She pressed, testing his balance, footwork, ability to step in tandem while resisting. He matched her, neither retreating nor overreaching. Around them thorns rustled, snagging loose strands of hair but never skin. They circled once, then twice, the only sound the soft percussion of breath and wood against wood. Halfway through the 3rd loop Seraya changed rhythm, lunging then arresting her momentum mid-step, forcing sudden imbalance. Many warriors stumbled at that pivot. The stranger flowed, allowing her motion to spin him outward while his blade maintained contact. Their silhouettes flickered over dark vines like twin dancers cut from paper. When the circuit completed, he released his sword tip and backed away. First trial finished. Seraya allowed a single nod. Second trial, candor. She lowered her weapon. Speak truth, Seraya draws blood. He lifted his eyes to the stars seeping above thorn walls. Very well. Quiet filled with anticipation. He inhaled, scent of roses and iron. Princess, you wear solitude like a crown because fear masquerades as pride. You fear that if anyone draws close they will find hollowness where a heart should be. So you forge walls with intellect and scorn. Yet inside you long for the gentleness you deny yourself. This contradiction is shredding you, and by winter's end the kingdom will taste that wound. The air snapped tight. Night insects hushed. Seraya held position, but her blade trembled. She felt iron nails of honesty gouged through years of polished defenses. No one had ever spoken of her secret dread, the echoing ache she sealed beneath triumphs. Not her tutors, not her father, not even the chapel priests. Rage flickered, then something older, relief, terrible and bright, as if shackles fell from her lungs. Moonlight bled silver across the garden of thorns, an arena of interlaced brambles and obsidian plinths reserved for rites of coronation and judgment. No lanterns were permitted, ritual demanded naked night. The air smelled of wet soil and winter roses that bloomed blood-red against the dark lattice of vines. Seraya arrived first. She wore a tunic of midnight wool for freedom of movement, hair bound in a single braid down her spine. At her belt hung 2 wooden practice blades. Though garden custom allowed steel she had chosen would to signal intention without surrendering advantage. She paced the ring path, boots brushing fallen petals. The stranger emerged from a shadowed archway. He had abandoned the rain-weighted cloak, wearing instead simple linen, bare arms revealing faint white scars that curved like faded script. He carried no weapon, not even a staff. He stopped at the garden gate, waiting. Seraya spoke into the hush. You know our law. To advance beyond this night, you must survive 3 passages through the thorns. Weapons optional. Each pass set by me. He stepped forward. Moonlight splashed across his features, angular yet softened by exhaustion that did not look like weakness. I will face whatever path you draw. Then mark the first passage. She flicked her wrist. One wooden sword arced toward him. He caught it with fluid reflex, grip settling as if he had known its weight all his life. Seraya drew her own, saluted by touching hilt to heart, then leveled the blade. Feist trial, endurance of will. We crossed the garden circumference in silence, blades locked, no word spoken. Break silence and you fail. He nodded once. Seraya advanced. Their wooden swords kissed with a muted clack. She pressed, testing his balance, footwork, ability to step in tandem while resisting. He matched her, neither retreating nor overreaching. Around them thorns rustled, snagging loose strands of hair but never skin. They circled once, then twice, the only sound the soft percussion of breath and wood against wood. Halfway through the third loop, Seraya changed rhythm, lunging then arresting her momentum mid-step, forcing sudden imbalance. Many warriors stumbled at that pivot. The stranger flowed, allowing her motion to spin him outward while his blade maintained contact. Their silhouettes flickered over dark vines like twin dancers cut from paper. When the circuit completed, he released his sword tip and backed away. First trial finished. Seraya allowed a single nod. Second trial, candor. She lowered her weapon. Speak truth, Seraya draws blood. He lifted his eyes to the stars seeping above thorn walls. Very well. Quiet filled with anticipation. He inhaled, scent of roses and iron. Princess, you wear solitude like a crown because fear masquerades as pride. You fear that if anyone draws close they will find hollowness where a heart should be. So you forge walls with intellect and scorn. Yet inside you long for the gentleness you deny yourself. This contradiction is shredding you, and by winter's end the kingdom will taste that wound. The air snapped tight. Night insects hushed. Seraya held position, but her blade trembled. She felt iron nails of honesty gouged through years of polished defenses. No one had ever spoken of a secret dread, the echoing ache she sealed beneath triumphs. Not her tutors, not her father, not even the chapel priests. Rage flickered, then something older, relief, terrible and bright, as if shackles fell from her lungs. Blood indeed had been drawn, her pride punctured from inside. She swallowed. Third trial, she said through a tightening throat. Exchange of courage. She sheathed the wooden sword. Moonlight glinted on her eyes, bright with unshed tears. Walk the inner maze unarmed. I will stand outside. Thorn shadows will attempt to terrify you. Return with a single blossom untouched by the briars. He stepped to the maze entrance. What of you? I will wait, silent. If you do not return, I will accept that outcome. He accepted the decree with a nod and vanished into the living labyrinth. Vines shifted, swallowing his silhouette. Seraya exhaled, pressing palm against her own sternum where the stranger's words still echoed like drums in bone. Wind stayed petals at her boots. Minutes dripped, slow and heavy. She listened for cries of pain, for snapping branches, for any sign, but the thorns kept their secrets. Inside, the stranger moved by instinct and memory older than this palace. The maze responded, vines writhed, leaves whispering illusions, voices of lost family, shouts of warriors he had failed to save, mirages of deserts where he almost died. Darkness thickened, but he focused on breath, the anchor that belonged to no fae. Finally a clearing opened, moonlight spilling on a solitary rose of impossible whiteness. He cupped it carefully, thorns drawing beads of blood across his palms, then retraced his path. Seraya saw him step from shadow, clothing torn, arms lined with scratches, but the rose untouched. She felt something deep shift, like tectonic plates aligning after centuries. Without speaking she reached, taking the rose between 2 fingers. His blood still glistened on the stem. She pressed the blossom against her lips, then tucked it behind her. Trial concluded, she whispered. The stranger bowed. His gaze held hers with quiet intensity, and in it she saw no triumph, no plea, only recognition, co-equal fragments of a shared secret. Above them the first break in the clouds revealed Orion's belt. 3 bright stars in a perfect row. Seraya glanced up, then back. Yet in that split instant something flickered across the stranger's outline, as though starlight attempted to claim him already, veil-thin threads tugging at his edges. Then the vision vanished. He was flesh once more. Seraya's breath hitched. She wanted to speak, to demand explanation of whatever magic sought him, but words died as footfalls sounded at the garden gate. Maelin and 2 council guards entered, torches flaring. "Highness, your father summons you." Maelin eyed the stranger, wary. "Council has convened for emergency matters." Seraya's spine straightened. "Escort our guest to the west wing. He is to be provided fresh garments, food, and a physician. Touch no blood on his palms. Let none be washed away until I say." The guards nodded, perhaps unnerved by the authority in her tone. The stranger obeyed without protest, though his eyes lingered on Seraya as if seeking confirmation of something only they could see. She held the gaze, a silent promise neither understood yet both felt. When he disappeared into torchlit corridors, Seraya turned skyward again. Orion gleamed, indifferent, but beneath those stars her heart beat louder than any throne-room drum, repeating a name that had never been spoken. Stranger. Mirror. Storm Tamer. Council chambers thrummed with conflicting voices when Seraya arrived. King Alaric stood at the tall window, robe half open, ink stains on his cuffs, a man driven sleepless by ledgers that prophesied collapse. Around the round table advisors argued, one demanding heavier taxation of outlying provinces, another insisting they sell crown jewels to import grain, a third urging conscription of able-bodied peasants into state farms. Panic corrodes reason. That corrosion now flaked from every tongue. Alaric lifted a weary hand. "Silence. The princess has come. Speak plainly, Castell." Lord Castell bowed low. "Your Majesty, our reserves will not outlast the next snowfall. Caravans from the lowlands report roads washed out by violent storms. We cannot import enough grain. There are already bread riots in the Shoal district." Alaric faced Seraya. The decree was intended to restore hope, yet the people see only endless failure. Seraya felt heat coil in her chest. The trials lack authenticity because the suitors pursue crown, not companionship, she said. "But tonight I met a man who—" She paused. Council eyes pinned her. She chose her next words carefully. "He sees Caldria without illusions. Permit me to explore this further before we abandon the edict." Castell scoffed. "An unnamed wanderer. Highness, your heart is no place for tales spun by moonlit fancy." Seraya stepped closer, voice glacial. "Join me at dawn. Watch her move and listen. If you cannot detect value, then I will withdraw my petition." Alaric studied his daughter. Something new radiated from her, urgent, vulnerable, resolute. He gave a slight nod. "Very well. At dawn." They gathered in the eastern practice courtyard where frost limned every flagstone. Councillors wrapped in furs sat on benches, breath clouding. Seraya wove practice tapes in place, then beckoned the stranger, who now wore simple charcoal trousers and a linen shirt provided by palace stores. His palms were still bandaged. Crimson had dried in star-shaped patterns on the cloth. Seraya addressed the witnesses. "One final public trial, mastery of self. He will face me with wooden blades until first blood, drawn by either of us." Gasps, wooden blades rarely cut. Seraya retrieved 2 single-edged wasters carved from white oak, edges sanded smooth. She handed one to him. Their grips touched, a spark invisible to council eyes, but neither combatant missed it. They bowed. The fight began. Movement cascaded. Seraya launched a high act, pivoting into a rising cut meant to test his injured palms. He rotated wrists, intercepting, redirecting her force into a spiral that forced her to vault backward. Spectators murmured. She slid, reverse stance, heart-thrumming delight. At last someone who could read the language of momentum without footnotes. Strike, parry, bind, release. Their blades sang dry wood on wood, but underneath was a duet of intent. She pressed. He yielded just enough, then reversed. He learned her rhythms, then shattered them, offering empty space where her strikes should land. She countered by shortening angles, turning offense into defense mid-flow. Sweat glistened on their brows despite morning chill. Minutes passed measured by exclamations from Castell and reverent silence from Maelin. Finally Seraya feinted a thrust toward his left shoulder, then snapped into a short descending cut toward his thigh. an impossible angle for most combatants. The stranger's blade vanished from its guard, reappeared intercepting haze at the last breath, then skimmed his sleeve, just enough. A thin crimson thread blossomed on her forearm. First blood, hairs. Silence. Seraya gazed at the bead of red, warm against cold air. She raised her eyes to his. In them she saw apology and pride braided. He lowered his weapon, bowing deeper than tradition required. She returned the bow, deeper still, acknowledging mastery. Counselors erupted in overlapping reactions, condemnation of protocol, or at skill, disbelief that the princess bled willingly. Alaric raised both palms for quiet. "Your name," he said to the stranger. "If we are to consider your claim, you must reveal lineage." The man straightened. "Names are masks. But if a title will ease your court, call me Bren." A fabricated sound, yet it carried weight as though chosen carefully. "My father tilled salt earth beyond the sighing dunes. My mother taught me that every breath borrowed from the world must be repaid with purpose." Alaric frowned. "Salt farmers do not wield swords as you do." "I learned from travelers," Bren said, "and from the wind." Castell spat disbelief, but Alaric silenced him. "Very well. The law does not forbid origin. The law demands commitment." He turned to Seraya, who stood poised, blood drying. "Daughter, have you found what you sought?" Seraya's voice carried so every scribe could record each syllable. "I have found someone who mirrors my soul's fault lines. With his help I might mend them. I choose to continue these trials with Bren alone." Council burst into immediate uproar. Seraya lifted both arms. "Hear me. The decree promised exile for any who fail. I amend it. All others who remain may withdraw without penalty. This is now a crucible for two." Alaric hesitated, weighing risk against his daughter's fire. At last he spoke. "So be it. Bren will remain as sole candidate. A fortnight from now we proclaim verdict." Bren bowed again, but Seraya caught a fleeting flicker of worry in his gaze. She knew why. The curse he had hinted at inside the garden. One who tames the Stormborn must be claimed by the stars. The countdown to loss had already begun. That night Seraya invited Bren to the library tower, a spiral loft of glass floors beneath a copper dome. Scrolls ringed every tier, lit by floating witch lamps. She dismissed servants and poured mulled wine. They sat opposite each other at a low table. "Why did you really come?" she asked. Bren studied the ruby liquid swirling. "Because I felt a tremor in the world. A prophecy older than kingdoms said a star would fall twice, first to give and then to take. I followed the second fall and found it pointed here." Seraya's pulse leapt. "You mean me? Your faith under fire, your pride, the storms that echo your moods, yes. I feared what might happen if no spirit equal to yours arrived. Not to conquer you, but to stand beside." She tasted the wine, let warmth spread. "What will the stars claim if I yield?" "My life," Bren said without flinch. "I knew from the first step. A heart strong enough to awaken yours would ignite the tether that always looped around my destiny." Silence bloomed, heavy as summer night. Seraya's throat tightened. "You speak of death as calmly as bread." "Bread is earned by hunger," he answered. "Meaning is earned by sacrifice." Emotion rose like thunderclouds inside her sternum. "I refuse that price." Prices are not negotiated with constellations. They are written at the birth of worlds. She stood abruptly, pacing among scroll racks. "Then we defy the sky. We cut the tether." Bren smiled sadly. "Perhaps." She turned, eyes shining, fierce. "I am Seraya of Caldria, Stormborn. I break historians' quills and kings' decrees. Do you not think I can rewrite a fate?" "I believe if anyone can, it is you," he said. "But remember, rewriting costs ink, and ink in this universe is blood." Later, as they walked along the parapet, wind-whipping cloaks, Seraya asked, "What scares you?" "Waking one day to find I lived someone else's story." "And what delights you?" "The quiet after rain when leaves stop dripping in unison and begin choosing their own rhythm." She laughed, soft. It surprised both of them. Bren's smile answered, gentle as lantern light. Below, the city of Caldria nestled in uneasy dreams. Above, stars turned like distant gears. Within, two hearts, once forged in isolation, began a dangerous orbit, each tugging tides the other never knew they had. The fortnight that followed turned the palace into a living paradox. Beyond its walls riots flared in grain markets and unrest thickened like smoke. Yet inside those same walls Seraya and Bren pushed back curtains of formality and stepped, day by day, into the thin light of honesty. They met each dawn in the frost garden where roses blushed beneath ice. At first they exchanged sword patterns, breezes of steel that tested reflex and nerve. Soon sparring slipped into conversation, each strike punctuated by questions deeper than any blade. Why do people worship strength? Seraya asked while their wooden swords locked above their heads. Because weakness frightens them. Bren pivoted, disengaged, then tapped her shoulder. True courage is admitting fragility even when the world is cruel. Later she found him in the scriptorium, sleeves rolled, helping a frail archivist rebuild shattered shelving toppled during a tremor. They spoke about the weight of stories pulled from rubble. Bren confessed that when he was 10 every book in his salt farm village burned in a storm fire. He still carried the crackling smell of parchment in nightmares. Seraya, listening, felt another stone wall inside her heart crumble. That afternoon she presented him to King Alaric in the solar gallery. Sunlight painted mosaics across burnished floors. Alaric measured Bren with eyes crowding both suspicion and dawning hope. What followed was not interrogation but chess. The king was renowned for strategies that mapped economics and war. Yet Bren opened with an unorthodox gambit that left half the court gasping. For an hour ebony and ivory pieces danced. At the end Alaric tipped his king in mute acknowledgement, sweat at his temples but mirth curling his beard. You wield humility like a weapon, he said. That may save us more surely than steel. That night Seraya and Bren walked the battlements above a city blanketed by curfew silence. Citadel torches flickered, lonely guardians against unrest. Below, her people starved. Inside her ribs compassion thundered, but so did dread of weakness. She pressed her palms on the parapet until knuckles whitened. I could give away the entire treasury and the famine would still return next season, she whispered. Bren stood close enough that his cloak brushed hers. Then fix the root, not the symptom. Break the contract of fear that keeps farmers tied to blighted valleys. Invite them to plant on royal terraces. Feed them with your courage. She turned, meeting eyes steady as starlight. If I fail, the blame will devour me. If you refuse to act, the blame will devour them. His voice gentled. Leadership is a bridge between risk and mercy. Build it. In that moment, beneath a winter moon ringed with pale fire, Seraya's defenses split. She reached for his hand. The touch was small yet seismic. Heat rushed through her, not lust but relief, the astonishing realization that she was allowed to lean without collapsing. He squeezed once, a vow spoken in pressure, not words. When they parted, she felt phantom warmth echo long after. The next day Seraya marched into council chambers and shattered centuries-old land charters with a single decree. Every royal garden, including the legendary hanging terraces, would be replanted with grain and root vegetables for public kitchens. Nobles protested. She overrode them. Soldiers hauled topsoil under guard. Priests blessed seedlings. Word spread through alleys quicker than wildfire. The Stormborn had tilted her lightning toward them. Hope flickered. Maelin witnessed the transformation, eyes shining. Highness, you glow like dawn, she said. Seraya touched the white rose, now wilted, still tucked behind her. Dawn must hurry, she murmured. The stars wait to collect a debt. That evening Seraya and Bren met in the observatory atop the astral tower. Crystalline lenses captured constellations, projecting ghostly lines on a marble floor. Bren traced one arc that looped from Orion to a distant cluster pulsing faint red. That is the Seeker's Loop, he said. Legend claims it binds any wandering spirit brave enough to walk its path. Can it be unbound? She asked. Only if the spirit relinquishes what it found most precious. His hand brushed hers again, softer than the brush of a moth's wings. Neither spoke the obvious. They watched stars travel, each tick of movement a heartbeat closer to reckoning. The day chosen for the verdict arrived beneath skies flayed by violet lightning. Priests assembled in the celestial amphitheater, an open circle carved into the highest plateau, where air tasted thin as glass. Hundreds of citizens trekked winding paths, drawn by rumor that destiny itself would stand trial. At the amphitheater's heart lay the oculum, a circular dais engraved with concentric sigils that pulsed when certain astral alignments converged. The last time it had awakened was the night Seraya was born. Today the sigils glimmered again, dull crimson beneath pale frost. Seraya entered first, robes of storm blue silk trailing behind. Bren followed, barefoot by choice, wearing simple gray. King Alaric presided. High Priestess Elira stood opposite, ceremonial blade hidden within her sleeves. Priestess Elira raised her voice, amplified by acoustics carved with sound guides. Caldria petitions the stars. We seek verdict. Will union of Storm Child and Wanderer restore harmony or invite ruin? She motioned to Bren. Step forward. Bren obeyed. As soon as his foot touched the innermost ring, the sigils flared brilliant white, casting spears of light skyward. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The priestess unfurled an ancient scroll sealed in obsidian wax. Prophecy of the twice-fallen star, she intoned. Line 27. When the storm's soul embraces her mirror, the heavens reclaim the mirror, and the kingdom blossoms in sorrowed spring. The meaning is clay. Seraya strode to Bren's side, defiant. Prophecy can bend. Elira's eyes were pity and iron. Attempting to bend celestial law is like ordering tides to shrink. A sacrifice must occur. The man will ascend. You will remain, crowned by absence. Murmurs turned to cries of protest and grief among onlookers who had grown to admire Bren. Soldiers positioned along terraces shifted uneasily. Alaric swallowed emotion, voice breaking. Is there no alternative sacrifice? Elira shook her head. The exchange is specific. Life for life. His life for her liberation from pride which binds storms. Seraya felt rage rise like molten stone. Then I offer my life instead. Take me. Elira closed her scroll, saddened. The prophecy never names you as offering. You are the constant, the axis. Bren spoke softly. Seraya, I walked here knowing this end. I would choose it again. No, her cry cracked. She gripped his forearm as though she could chain him to earth. There must be a fissure in fate we can slip through. Bren turned toward the crowd, voice carrying. Caldria, I am nothing but a wanderer. Yet love for your future eclipses my fear of ending. Let your fields bloom where I fall. Elira unsheathed the ceremonial blade, a thin crescent of meteoric iron. At the sight, Seraya propelled herself between Bren and Priestess. I will fight the sky itself. Lightning forked across clouds, answering her fury. Winds exploded, toppling banners. Citizens screamed. Guards raised shields against stinging grit. Bren pulled Seraya close. Your wrath will tear them apart, he said. Let me go. Tears cut hot tracks down her cheeks. Teach me how to survive after, she pleaded. Listen to the silence between thunder, he whispered. That is where I will hide. He stepped back, pressing his palm over Hayes, then turned to the oculum's center. His blood-stained bandages unraveled, strips lifting as though magnetized toward the sigils. White light coiled up his arms, along his spine, crowning his head in shimmering halo. Elira reversed her blade, offering hilt first, sign that mortal weapon was unnecessary. The heavens had claimed their instrument. Bren closed his eyes. Light intensified, heating air until moisture flashed to steam. In the glare, Seraya shouted his name, a word never heard before, only breathed between them, but wind swallowed it whole. With a thunderclap like worlds colliding, the light collapsed inward. Where Bren had stood, only a single white feather fell, landing on the dais. Silence drowned the amphitheater. Clouds parted, revealing sun for the first time in weeks. Its warmth washed tears into steam on Seraya's face. Yet inside her chest an arctic void yawned, roaring louder than crowds, louder than banners flapping victory. Maelin rushed forward, catching Seraya's shoulders. He chose, she whispered. Seraya looked at the empty space, scarcely breathing. Then I choose too. I will live so loudly even the stars cannot ignore my grief. The feather trembled. She lifted it reverently and tucked it behind the same ear that once bore his rose. Then she turned to the crowd. Voice hoarse but unbroken, she proclaimed, We harvest his gift starting now. Open the granaries, mobilize healers to every district, and rename this day the Festival of Quiet Valor. Let no one forget what the silence between stars sounds like. Cheers erupted, raw and bittersweet. Yet Seraya heard only wind. In the months that followed, Caldria transformed with swiftness that felt miraculous. Storm fronts moderated, rain falling in measured rhythms that nourished rather than drowned. Wheat sprouted on terrace gardens where royal roses once preened. Ships bearing grain from allies no longer faced snarling gales, and fishermen reported docile seas. Seraya threw herself into rebuilding. She slept 4 hours a night, drafting decrees at dawn, visiting orphanages by dusk. She ate humble rations with field workers, her once silken gloves replaced by burlap half-mitts. People adored her with fervor once reserved for saints. Yet they whispered that her eyes never fully returned from some distant horizon. The feather remained tucked behind her each day until it frayed. When barbs loosened, she encased it in crystal and placed it on the North Tower ledge, a beacon for whatever spirits navigated moonlit air. Maelin pushed cups of restorative broth toward her at council meetings. "You cannot outrun sorrow by sprinting through governance," she chided. "I am not running," Seraya answered, scribing. "I am singing in a language governance understands." Nevertheless, cracks appeared. Some midnight she wandered empty corridors and found herself outside the guest chamber where Bren had once slept. She pressed her forehead to the door like a penitent. The corridor torches hissed. For one breath she swore she felt warmth radiating inside, as though a hearth still burned. She lingered until dawn, then walked away, leaving the hinge damp with tears. Festivals continued each month beneath newly peaceful skies. Always named for Bren, yet never speaking his surname, because he had none. Minstrels sang melodies based on the cadence of his final words. Seraya attended each festival but refused the vantage of royals, choosing instead to stand among farmers whose hands were cracked with labor. They bowed. She bowed back. They shed silent gratitude. On the anniversary of Bren's ascent, Seraya unveiled a monument in the Garden of Thorns, a simple stone bench positioned beneath the rose maze archway, inscribed with 7 words, "Listen to the silence between stars." The bench faced north where mountains touched sky, horizon where storms were born. Visitors left offerings of white petals and pages filled with private confessions, confident the wind would carry them upward. Despite this healing, the Queen's counselors feared for her spirit. Lord Castell privately recommended marriage alliances to anchor her future. She refused. "A soul is not patched like a roof," she said. He dropped the subject. One late summer evening, Seraya ascended the North Tower again, carrying a small hammered bell of silver. She had commissioned it from the same smith who forged council seals. She hung it on a crossbeam, tethered by crimson thread. When wind rose, the bell chimed, a clear, mournful note that drifted across rooftops. Citizens learned that each ring meant the Queen remembered her lost companion. Soon other bells appeared, chiming from balconies, archways, even fishing boats. The city became a chorus of resonant heartache, proof that loss could turn into music, not silence. Yet none of this filled the void. Seraya woke some nights convinced she heard footsteps in the observatory, the whisper of linen on marble. She would rush there, find only starlight pooling, and collapse to her knees, whispering sunrise prayers to whatever gods still listened after claiming their due. Years slipped like river water between steady palms. Caldria thrived, its flag now depicting a white feather crossed by a single bolt of lightning. Invincible humility. Children studied new civic oaths praising kindness as the first courage. Prosperity bred scholars, healers, artists. The once desperate Shoal district blossomed into an academy quarter. Yet Seraya remained a figure woven from frost and sun. Her beauty matured into carved elegance, but she rarely smiled. Instead, she poured herself into mentorship, training future leaders to wield empathy as weapon and shield. They adored her, but no pupil reached the chamber of her heart where Bren's echo lived. One autumn equinox festival, when leaves turned copper and the sky arched cloudless, Seraya found herself alone on the garden bench. Twilight bruised the horizon, and bells across the city rang softly in shifting wind patterns. She closed her eyes, listening. Somewhere between chimes a different tone emerged, so faint she thought it memory, a single wooden blade clacking against another. Her eyes flew open. The maze entrance yawned, path dim but familiar. No figure stood there. Still, the clack repeated, this time replaced by a hush of breath. "Bren," she whispered, hope and fear entwined. Silence answered, though leaves rustled beneath a breeze that smelled of rain after drought. She rose, hand brushing the crystal-encased feather she wore now as pendant. Moonlight speared through vine gaps. On the stone walkway she discovered a white petal, fresh despite season. She followed. More petals led deeper into the maze. When she reached the clearing where Bran once plucked the perfect rose, moonlight pooled like liquid silver. At its center stood a figure made of mist and stardust, features blurred yet familiar. The outline bowed. Seraya's voice shook. "Are you real?" A whisper drifted, woven from wind over distant dunes. "I am the silence you kept alive." The outline shimmered, coalescing enough that she saw eyes bright with the same unwavering calm. "You taught the sky empathy. In return, it grants moments between heartbeats." Tears glittered. "Stay longer. Speak longer. I stand only as long as your faith outshouts despair." His translucent hand lifted. Between thumb and forefinger gleamed the same white rose, unmarred. "Take this to remember that surrender and power can live in the same breath." She reached. Fingers closed around stem. This time thorns did not pierce. When she looked up, the figure already diffused, scattering into threads of light that rode a sudden upward draft. She inhaled raggedly. "Test me again," she said, echoing the dare he once offered. Wind answered, swirling fallen leaves into a spiral that ascended, then dispersed into calm night. Seraya returned to the bench, rose in hand, and watched dawn bleed gold across the world. The hollow place within no longer felt frozen. It felt like fertile soil waiting for seeds she would plant in her own time. She whispered, "I will keep listening." On the city's balconies, bells began chiming a new cadence, neither mourning nor celebration but quiet wonder. Citizens paused in their routines, looking skyward, sensing some shift they could not name. They did not see their queen on a stone bench, eyes closed, smiling at memory and possibility. Yet they felt the ripple of her peace. And high above, beyond clouds, the stars drifted in their eternal dance. Somewhere among them a single ember glowed slightly brighter, mirroring the heartbeat of a kingdom built upon the courage to love and to lose. Decades later, scholars would call Seraya the queen of resonant silences, noting that during her reign Caldria invented 3 musical scales based on wind bells, integrated grief counseling into civic duties, and wrote the first constitutional clause that defined love as a public utility. Pilgrims visited the garden bench, leaving letters sealed with silver wax that melted in moonlight so that words rose as invisible steam, believed to ascend to the wanderer among constellations. Generations spoke that if you sat at the bench during first snow and closed your eyes, you might feel a callous palm steadying yours. None dared claim the stranger's true name. They simply told children bedtime stories about a mirror who walked on bare feet, so proud hearts would remember humility. And whenever lightning forked across distant peaks, elders smiled and said the storm's soul was laughing again, grateful for the silence between stars where devotion still turned its gentle orbit.
Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment your thoughts and share. See you in the next story. AFRITALES by Moonlight.